Joining us today. My name is Sarah Adams from CECP. I'm the Senior Director of Communications and Marketing for the organization. And thank you everyone for joining us on what is for most of us, I think, a very rainy July day. But we're here to talk about a very important topic. And I'm joined by Jeffrey Connor-Naylor from ReadyNation. And they're an organization that focuses on the workforce and the economy and have focused on the census for a while now, knowing that it is vital to a lot of the work that companies like you are doing and across all sectors. So I will let Jeff introduce our panelists for today, but I think just from the CECP perspective, this is really important for us to bring this information to our companies, because we know that you are thinking about your stakeholders and your stakeholder needs, including your employees, your customers, and the communities in which you operate. So I'm really excited about this presentation today. Jeff will talk about the different aspects of the census and help us make the business case internally, because we know that you as representatives in your company who have a finger on the pulse of what's important for your stakeholders can bring this information back and say, this is how we can engage. And there are many ways to engage on many parts of the spectrum. So we're pleased to bring some company case studies to you today to talk through that. So with that, Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
Great. And thanks so much again for everyone taking time out of their day to join us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are at. Just a very brief overview of who we are. So we are the business initiative of the Council for a Strong America, which is a national non-profit organization. We typically work on issues that help build the economy and the workforce, state and federal policy, and that primarily is looking at smart investments in children and youth that help prepare them to be successful in life. So just a brief overview of what we're going to discuss today. First, we're going to take a look at why the census is important. Then we're going to take a look at threats to an accurate count for next year. Then just a brief overview from me about how the business community can help get out the count. And then finally, we're going to end with some spotlights on two companies. So we are joined by Nancy Moody from DTE Energy. And then we're also joined by Don Lowery from Nielsen as well. And they'll provide you with more of an overview of what they plan to do in support of the count and how they came to make that decision and why it's important for them. So with that, we're going to start off with the first chunk, and that is why the census is important. So before I do that, I'm just going to give a broad overview of the census. So I'm sure, as everyone knows, the decennial count is conducted every 10 years. And it is mandated by the Constitution that we conduct a count of everyone who resides in the United States. So one of the reasons why the census is so important is because we only do this every 10 years. And it is the most robust snapshot of who is in the United States that we have. So if we have an accurate count, then we're stuck with that information for 10 years. The other big thing about next year's count is that for the first time ever, they're going to offer an online form. In the past, it's been conducted by phone and by paper forms that have been mailed out. Now, both of those traditional options will still be available. So if there are individuals who are concerned about submitting information electronically, then they can always do it with the other options as well. That being said, the Census Bureau certainly wants to encourage folks to do it online because it's more cost effective. So starting off with why it is important, the original purpose of the count was to apportion seats in Congress to states. So there's about 16 states across the country who may lose a seat or gain a seat in the next 2020 count. It is also used to effectively allocate public funds. About $800 billion in federal spending is allocated with census info every year. Now, for companies, that's important because a lot of those resources are used to help build a strong economy. Things like roads, education, workforce training, utility assistance so that workers are able to have warm homes, housing, and so on. Now, these first two arguments, I would say, are what is really getting the most press in the news for why the census is important. The third argument is really not getting as much press, and we're doing as much work as we can to get the word out about why the count is important for companies and their daily operations. So as I said earlier, the census provides us with the most robust snapshot of who resides in the United States. It offers detailed demographic info that helps a company assess where potential employees may live, where potential customers may live, what products and services to offer, and then where they may locate a new store, a new office. Now, the census form next year only asks about 10 basic questions, but that information is fed into and is used to develop other analyses that help to determine the income of a certain population, the age, family size, how much education they have. It even helps to determine the cost of commuting to work in a given area. It also helps to and serves as the foundation of about 140 different economic analyses that the government produces that help guide the economy. Things like the national unemployment rate, interest rates, exports, construction. It's really hard to stress the importance of getting it right next year, having an accurate count, because it really is the foundation in the United States of a data-driven economy. I was working with a trade association that works with shopping centers and malls across the United States, and it's an international group. And they said that the United States is one of the easiest countries to work in because we have that foundation of information about who is here, which then feeds into all the other economic analyses and really provides the justification for investment in the United States. Now, some companies might say, well, that's fine. I really understand the importance of that public information, but we develop our own information in-house, or we purchase information from a third-party commercial data analysis firm. Which all of that, I'm sure, is true for a lot of companies. However, even those in-house and private commercial data bases require a benchmark. They need to take that information and make sure that it is accurate. And they essentially need to test it against a larger body of information. And the 2020 count and the other decennial counts are the most robust tests for accuracy that we have. So even those private sources of information rely on the accuracy of the census as well. So now we're going to move on to the next chunk, and that is threats to an accurate count. Now, some of the threats here are simply that the Bureau is going to have less offices around the United States than they had in 2010. The census was underfunded for several years. They had to cut back on tests to make sure that the form is accurate and so that they can identify any problems and issues once the census is in the field. So in some areas, such as in rural areas of the United States, it's a little bit of a question mark how the census is going to perform. There's also a series of historically hard to count groups. Groups that have always been undercounted in previous censuses. Those include communities of color, including immigrant and foreign-born households, young kids, rural areas of the United States, households that move a lot, so young individuals and low-income households who are typically renters and who may move more frequently are typically hard to count. And then for this next, and then for the 2020 census, homes who don't have reliable access to the internet or don't use the internet that much. Those households are especially hard to count. Now, one of the big question marks for 6 or 8 months now was whether or not the citizenship question was going to be on the form. You may or may not have seen over the past 2 weeks a lot of back and forth from the administration and the courts about whether the question was going to be on the form. Officially, as of today, the question is not going to be on the 2020 census form. A lot of that had to do with, one, there were folks on one side that would say, well, some foreign-born folks who are in the United States may not want to provide that information. Others would say that adding a question at this late hour to the form is not based on good questionnaire development science. The form goes through years of testing. So adding any additional question at this time would kind of throw off the researched balance of the form. Now it is officially off the form, but there's still fear that some foreign-born folks may still be concerned about completing the form. So it still presents a barrier to counting those individuals and those households. And I see folks asking questions. We will address those at the very end of the presentation. So moving on to the next chunk, how can a company help get out the count? So first of all, just a brief overview of the census timeline. So between now and about February 2020 is really the education phase. We're now in a phase where we want folks and stakeholders to really understand why the census is important. In January, we'll begin to turn that attention more towards the general population to get word out about why the census is important. The key part is about mid-March, households across the United States are going to begin to receive information in the mail encouraging them to go online and complete their census forms. Some households who are maybe more remote will receive the paper form as well at that time. Between March and about the end of April is when we want households to fill out the form in whatever way they choose themselves. The key here is early response. We want households to do it on their own. And the reason for that is beginning in May, for those who have not responded, they'll get a second mailing encouraging them to fill out the form. But then also the Bureau will begin to put boots on the ground and knock on doors. Now that second phase of going around the community, of sending out new mail, that is the most expensive part of the form, or of the counting process. Now there's some areas where it's inevitable. There's some hard to count groups where it's inevitable that they're going to need to send folks to collect information door to door. But to kind of hone in on those hardest to count groups, we need to make sure that as many folks as possible respond early. And that's really that March to April timeframe is really when a company can have the most impact on the count. So about a month and a half time frame, and really kind of stacking that work at the beginning of March. Or I'm sorry, mid-March to kind of beginning of April, and then into April as well. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the ways that a company can help. So because it's the first online form ever, posting a message on a website, an app, on Twitter or Facebook with a link to the census website is one of the most cost-effective ways to help that can reach a lot of folks. A company can also consider putting a kiosk or a section of their office to where employees can go to fill out the form as well. In 2010, as an example, Pepsi developed a whole campaign to get out the count among the Latino community, and they developed a website where folks could upload their own stories and experiences about being in the United States. Engaging the media is a great way as well. So in 2010, Nickelodeon lent Dora the Explorer to a range of campaigns encouraging parents to include their young kids when they fill out the form. Univision just recently wove a census program, or a census section into a larger reality show focused on kids. And of course, the goal there is to encourage a parent to include their young kids. There's other ways to communicate with customers as well, and that really determines on how you engage with your customer base. That could be putting a message on a grocery store bag, inserts in a mailing or an email that goes out, promotional materials in stores, Target in 2010, and the circular that you can pick up when you enter the store. I believe during the first week of April, that included a message about the census. Now, a lot of companies, don't have the time to invest in sort of these larger customer outreach campaigns, but there's also a lot of ways to be impactful by simply engaging employees, putting information in a break room, any kind of communication with employees when they receive their paycheck, putting something in there. As I've said before, allowing them to complete the form at work. And what's important as well is if you decide to do that, which is a more internal way, up to this point, the citizenship question and the partisan nature that it's brought to the form and to the issue in general has had a lot of companies wanting to go this more internal, this more private route. And if you determine to go that route, a really important way to extend that is to encourage your employees to participate, but then to encourage them to talk to their family and friends to do the same thing. Those are just a few of the ways that you can help. We've also developed a report that we can send around after this webinar that provides some more detailed information of the variety of ways that a company can help next year. The other way is, of course, to contribute locally as well. So a lot of companies, of course, have a corporate outreach, a community outreach team. I know that Univision is partnering with local community-based organizations to offer volunteers at community events to hand out information about the count. And then, of course, a company can provide fiscal support as well to a local or a national census campaign. And we'll also hear a little bit more about that in a minute. So now we're going to transition into a series of case studies with DTE Energy and Nielsen. So first up, we are going to hear from Nancy Moody from DTE Energy. So Nancy, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Nancy, are you here? Okay, I cannot hear you if you are here. Nancy, can you hear us?
There we go. We were all muted.
Gotcha. All right, great.
Okay, so I am unmuted, correct?
Excellent. Yes, I can hear you, and I hope everyone else can.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And I'd just like to say thank you to CECP and to Council for a Strong America for putting on this webinar and starting to really raise awareness across the country.
Great. Great. Well, we very much appreciate your time, especially because I know that DTE Energy is really one of the first companies across the US to really put a stake in the ground to say that the Census is important for us, and we're going to do everything that we can to help ensure that we have a strong count in the state of Michigan. So with that, the first question I have for you is, why is the 2020 census important for DTE Energy?
Well, thanks for that question, Jeff. To answer that, I'd like to just provide a little background on Michigan. I don't know if the listeners are familiar with the ALICE rate. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So we're talking about the working poor and those who are not working at all. And in Michigan, there are at least 50% of the adult population over age 16 who fall under the ALICE rate, which means they can't meet their basic needs. And this includes a lot of employed people. So we know in Michigan that getting any kind of resource that we can is certainly really important. We lay that over the top of the DTE Energy aspiration, which is to be the best operated energy company in North America. That makes sense. That's what we do. We're an energy company. And a force for growth and prosperity in the communities where we live and serve. So looking at something like the census, where for all of the reasons that you basically have already walked through, Jeff, for all of those reasons, we know that getting an accurate count is exceedingly important, not just to a DTE Energy, but to every single person we serve, and in truth, every single person in the country. Jeff? Jeff? Hello?
Hey, Jeff, you may be on mute.
Yes, I was, and it wouldn't allow me to bring down the screen to unmute myself, so I apologize for that. Nancy, as DTE Energy has began to think about what they want to do in support of the census, and we'll get to what that is in a minute, what sort of considerations or arguments did the company consider to get involved? And did you need to make an argument at the company? And if you did, and I'm not sure that you did, if you did, what kind of arguments did you need to make?
No, I mean, the great news for us when we have an aspiration like the one I just described, to be a force for growth and prosperity in the communities where we live and serve, there was no argument to be made. I can tell you that it was brought to our doorstep probably a little bit earlier than we would have focused directly by the governor, the mayor of the city of Detroit, and through the Michigan Nonprofit Association. And one of the hats I wear at DTE Energy is chairing the foundation at our company, and we manage the foundation and run the grants program. So in every way this started coming at us, we are certainly very, very involved in political leadership, policy leadership, both inside our own industry and in issues that allow us to be what we call a force for growth. And therefore, if you are Michigan and you know that the growth is all mostly in the sun states and on the coast, and we're neither of those things. We're not a coastal state. We're not a sun state. Although it is going to be over 100 degrees in Michigan this week. We know we're one of those states that you mentioned likely to lose a congressional seat. And with so much riding on what comes out of Washington, D.C., it was not a sell at DTE. It was a how many ways can we help, and how do we do this best to make it effective and efficient.
Great. And I think one of the points that you highlighted there as well is really to start early. Now is really the time to begin to think about how a company can use how they communicate with their employees, with their customers to support the count? Because it's really going to be upon us quickly here, and it might take time to kind of make a decision on how a company wants to proceed, and then to get the help to do so.
Yeah.
So on that note, and it sounds like you have a lot of great support in the state as well, which is fantastic. On that note, how does DTE at this time plan to support a strong count, and what have you already done to begin that?
Yes, we've actually done quite a bit already. You know, the first thing that for some, certainly for some of the larger companies to do, is just provide financial resources. Mm-hmm. And we have provided financial resources both through the nonprofits that are working this very hard, and through the office that the mayor's office has set up. My guess is the question will come from the state of Michigan as well. At the end of the day, collecting the census count is just exactly like any other kind of elective office campaign. It really gets right down to the grassroots, and it gets right down to a door-to-door effort. And so it is at that door-to-door, as your slide suggested, that the rubber will really meet the road. And in Michigan, we have a very large immigrant population. We have a very large population of folks who are quite frightened by the government, who do not trust the government. And by the way, they don't trust their energy company either. But we do know that we can, through our 10,000 strong workforce and our 10,000 strong contractor workforce, through our larger than that vendor workforce, send communications very much encouraging volunteerism. Because think about it again, this is really a door-to-door effort. And who do people trust most? Many times they trust their neighbors. So we know we have neighbors all over the state of Michigan in our employee and contract and vendor workforces. So we're strongly encouraging folks to get out and volunteer and become block captains. Number two, we have a very, very strong faith network, at least through Southeast Michigan. That's the network I work with most closely. And then in our urban centers in other cities across Michigan, we work with our faith partners, and they are now preaching the necessity of getting into the census and making sure that you count for all those reasons that you delineated, Jeff, for energy assistance, if you're us, of course, that's a big one, but transportation, housing, healthcare, education, if you're young, 0 to 3, if you're elderly. I mean, every kind of government service will make a difference to Michigan if we can get everybody counted. So nonprofits and faith network, just exceedingly important. And we have a great network of communications. One of your slides said parades, festivals, and local events. The DTE Foundation is a tremendous promoter of parades, festivals, and local events. And we are making sure that the communications materials are going out all summer long. And every opportunity we have for communication, social media, internal, external, if we can dream it up and it's communications, we will be communicating it. And the last piece that I think we haven't perhaps touched on is how strong CEOs and other strong leaders across business can encourage other businesses to do many of these same things we're doing. Because collectively, we're very powerful. We touch a lot of people. You know, singularly, DTE is not going to make all the difference in the state of Michigan. But with all the other businesses, if we could link arms, it could make a tremendous difference.
Absolutely. I could not have said it any better myself. So thank you so much for that overview of what DTE Energy plans to do. And on that note, we're now going to switch over to Don Lowery from Nielsen, who again was another company that came out in support of the count very, very early in the process. So Don, I'm going to try to unmute you right now, although it sounds like
I think I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Excellent.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And thank everyone. And thank CECP and ReadyNation for asking Nielsen to participate in this very important webinar.
Not a problem, and we appreciate your time. So Don, I'm going to ask you the same series of questions. And the first one, again, is just why is the 2020 count important for you?
So we are certainly in a unique position, and I'll explain why. There's no data set that's more important to Nielsen than the census. Many of you are familiar with the Nielsen television ratings, which estimate how many people are watching television nationally and in local markets. And those estimates include demographic information, which allows the sellers and the buyers of television advertising to come together to determine the value of ads and the most effective placement of those ads. We use the census data as the basis or the universe for all of our estimates. That is a fact that has been the case since Nielsen started doing television measurement almost 70 years ago, and it remains a fact today. And once the census data is reported, we use those numbers to determine the number of households that use television and the number of people who are in those households who are watching television. And that information that includes data on age, gender, race, and ethnicity, and other key demographic information. These population numbers are constantly updated after the initial census count. So the more accurate the census is, the more accurate the information is for our clients. And as was mentioned earlier, once this information is collected, it has a shelf life of at least 10 years. So it is really vital to get it right coming out of the gate. And just from our particular industry, the census is occurring at a time of increasing media fragmentation. And everyone on this call probably has seen that you're watching more sources of programming, news, entertainment, and information. So it's more important than ever to us that we get the most accurate census count so we can give our client the highest quality information possible as they're determining what to produce and actually where to advertise on those new and emerging platforms.
Yeah. And I assume that some of the folks on this call interact with you and the type of information that you are talking about in some way.
Well, I hope so.
Yes, yes. So Don, I mean, it sounds like for the company, this wasn't really a tough decision to support the count, but do you have any sort of recommendations, thoughts of how, if anyone on this phone call wanted to take this to executives in their companies to talk about why they should get involved in the census in some way, what sort of recommendations that would you give to them on any sort of arguments that they should make in support of the count?
So one of the conversations that came up earlier, Jeff, and we think it's very important and it's vital, is that none of us are operating in a vacuum. We have clients that we need to be successful. Everybody on this call has clients who they need to be successful. So that argument is really very important, that your business really can be a catalyst to provide information to other businesses. And let me give you just an example of that in our business, which consists of 4,000 clients across the world, and the majority of those being in the United States. But just think about the media companies and the creative community in the United States that depend on the data that Nielsen provides to support their businesses. So they're literally from producers to writers to actors to the hundreds of thousands of people who are employed in businesses that support the ad industry and the creative community. So that is, for example, Nancy mentioned all of the ancillary activities that happen because of the census. That example for us is in that part of the business, we're going to stress and we're going to actually help our clients understand that it's really kind of a chain reaction, that once this starts, once this count begins, making it accurate has benefits entirely down the supply chain.
Great. Great. Now, Don, you sort of began to talk about this, but is there anything else that the company plans to do to support a strong count?
So we'll go back from the start of what we did, and some of you may be familiar with this, but as Jeff mentioned earlier, there's been a plethora of activity in the courts concerning the citizenship question being potentially added to the census. So we got involved very early, and we, given the importance of the census to Nielsen, and given the fact that over our 70 plus years, and actually in the company as a whole, 90 plus years of measuring consumer behavior, we do a lot of testing on how people react to particular questions that they're asked. And we knew, based on that research, that if that citizenship question was placed on the census, we would get a significant reduction in the level of participation. So as a result of that, we joined a number of the plaintiffs. In the case, we filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court case that eventually we won, that opposed adding the citizenship question to the census. So that was the kind of official launch for us. And then in April, and I shared this with Sarah and with Jeff, and I told them we'd be happy to share this with any of you who wanted it. Our CEO, David Kinney, wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times that was published on April 22nd, and it called for the government not to add the citizenship question and explained the reasons why, which were summed up just in the comments I made earlier. We knew that this was going to have a negative impact on response rates, and that's detrimental to accurate count for the census. So that's the launch of what we did. And I'll just kind of tick off quickly some of the other things that we did. It was recommended earlier. We joined the Census Bureau National Partnership Program, and we'll work closely with them. Internally, we've established our own task force with our own subject experts. Nielsen has some of the most prominent researchers and demographers of any private company in the world, and we're using them along with some community representatives, and I'll talk a little bit about that, to help us develop a strategy to get the message out about the importance of the census to various stakeholders, including our clients and our community partners. And we're actually in the process of retaining an outside public relations and public affairs firm to help us with this. We'll dedicate a substantial portion of our outreach efforts to connecting with multicultural communities, knowing how vital an accurate count of those communities is to having the best possible census count. And I mentioned the community representatives. We have an organization or a council of 18 external members from all over the country who advise us on what we should do to best reach out to multicultural communities. And earlier this year, we asked them to make recommendations on which organizations that they could identify that would be supporting census awareness in communities of color. And with that, we provided three $50,000 grants to African-American organizations, Asian-American organizations, and Latinx organizations that are working specifically to increase awareness of the census in those communities. And we'll reach out later to the more than 200 nonprofit and community organizations we work with annually to provide them information on the census that they can share with their stakeholders. So that's the summation of what we have done, and there's more to come.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you so much for that overview. We will now open up the floor for any questions that people may have. You'll see that there is a Q&A box, and there's also a chat box. So if there's anything that you would like to ask right now, just go ahead and write the question in there. and then I will ask our panelists them. As you begin to think about that, I do want to answer a question that a few folks had, and that is that folks asked if this webinar will be recorded and distributed by CECP, and the answer to that is yes, it will. So after this, you can look for that, and you can feel free to share this recording with anyone that you like, either in the company or outside of the company.
Right, this is Sarah. We'll put it on our events page. We'll post the PowerPoint and the recording itself, and then also the op-ed that Don mentioned.
So it does not look like many folks have any questions at this time, which is not too surprising because we did share a lot of information. The one thing I will add, and you can feel free to add anything at this point. It looks like we do have a question. Oh, very good question. We had someone ask if there's a way to incorporate this into an email signature, which is a question I've not received yet. At this point in time, there is no specific materials or language that the Bureau has released yet about how to message this externally. That information is going to come. They are going to provide language to use on a website, on Twitter or Facebook. They're going to provide graphics as well to do that kind of work. If they do not develop a way to put this into an email signature, then we will certainly work with them. So my organization is a national partner with the Bureau. And we'll work with them to develop a strategy to do that. And that is a great way to get out word about the count. So thank you very much for that.
Jeff,
yes.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You're making me think of something else none of us mentioned that I can remember, and that is that we're putting things in multiple languages. And I am sure the Census Bureau is going to be doing it in, at a minimum, English and Spanish, and hopefully other languages as well.
Yes. Yeah. So there is an effort. So the Bureau is going to produce some materials in other languages. I'm almost certain that Spanish is going to be one of those. There's also a large network of national foundations and nonprofits that are investing time into translation as well. Mm-hmm. So we are going to develop, we are going to develop some materials as well that we are going to try to get translated into as many languages as we can, although those specific private resources, obviously there's a lot of other organizations that want to engage those as well, but that is a critical piece of this work, of course.
Yeah, and this is Sarah, and I think Jeff and I will continue to work together over the coming months. So when these materials do come available, we'll make sure to share them through CECP channels. So just watch for our, we can post them on our website attached to this event. On our website, there's the event page, but then there's past events. So you can find the information there. And then we'll also we'll be posting periodic updates in our newsletters and other communications channels.
Great, great. Okay, so with that, and please, if you have anything else to ask, please do. We have our national census initiative called Business for the 2020 Census. This is primarily just a free private email network. There's no obligations, where we too will send out information about the count, about our materials that we send out. those, of course, will also be posted as we share them with CECP as well. As you begin to think about whether or not you would like to do this or participate in this as a company, there are certainly others who have decided to join our more public side of the campaign, and DTE Energy and Nielsen participate in that group along with the others that are on the screen. It is always more helpful to know that there are other companies out there that are publicly in support of the count. I will share with you our website for the initiative in a minute, and that will provide you with the complete list of businesses and business organizations who are publicly a part of our initiative. But the listserv side, the email side, that is free and private. So in addition to our group, in addition to just paying attention to what CECP provides, the Census Bureau also would love to partner with companies through their national partnership program, where they will be working directly with a company to develop a strategy for them, whether it is public, whether it is internal, and providing their full suite of resources as well. And Sarah and I can connect you with them if that is something that you are interested in learning more about. Like Nancy had mentioned as well, is there are what is called complete count committees across the United States as well. They may not be called this specifically. I believe in Detroit, it's something like the Detroit Counts or something like that. But also, please engage with your local complete count initiatives, as they will be developing materials, resources, strategies that will be more place-based, that will be more tailored to the regions where you are. And as Nancy said, at some point in the process, this is going to become a door-to-door, on-the-ground campaign. And really those local groups are where that action is going to be most effective. So with that, we will make sure that you get a copy of this report. It includes all of the ways that a company can participate in the census. It lists examples for how companies plan to support the count next year, in addition to how and to what companies did in 2010 and 2000 as well. If there's any more questions at this time, you can certainly ask those. But this is my contact information, and our website to this initiative is below. So please visit the website. If you're looking for our materials or that report, look under the publications tab. If you're looking for the companies who are publicly in support of the census with our initiatives, look at the task force tab.
Jeff, it's Don. I wanted to add one more thing, and
Sure.
it kind of follows up a little bit what Nancy said, and we're all starting to think about 2020 in terms of operations. And one of the things that we are going to do is to look at this as an opportunity for some team building and working with HR here in New York City and in the major cities where we're located. There are pretty substantial operations that are going to go on starting this fall through the spring. One of the thoughts that was gone up in talking to New York City officials were pop-up census information booths throughout the city. So we're going to work with our HR department, our public affairs department, work with our HR department to help them. They're always looking for opportunities to have team building, particularly something that everybody can get around. So I would definitely recommend and suggest that people on this call think about that and approach your HR departments now to start thinking about some kind of structure around team building in the census.
Great. Great. That is fantastic. I'm very glad you had brought that up. One other thing I'll add, and the participants on this webinar do not know this yet, but we're also going to take this information, put it in written form with the permission of the companies as well, so that it lives online and is shareable as well. So we'll certainly share that with Sarah and CECP too. Excellent. Well, on that note, Sarah, we very much appreciate this opportunity to speak with folks, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I think this is a perfect representation of the kind of the information we like to share. Very rich on the stats and the business case. So thank you, Jeff. And then Nancy and Don, thank you so much for the implementation part of it, how this looks within a company. So I hope this was really helpful for everybody, and probably just the tip of the iceberg on how Jeff and others can help. We will, as I said, we'll share the information on our site, and we'll also we can send a follow-up email to the participants on this call with all the resources. But please do consider this a starting point, and we can continue to talk about how to support this. And it sounds like a great employee engagement opportunity, a great community engagement opportunity, which we know our companies are looking for. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sarah and Jeff.
Okay, thank you.